Story 1. I had to have a toe amputated due to diabetes, and during the process they must have cut or irritated a nerve. It was excruciating, and literally no pain medications worked at all. It lasted almost a month, and I seriously thought about killing myself. It was so bad. Story 2. Kidney stones. I suddenly woke up in the most intense pain in both my lower back and urinary tract, and I was covered in sweat. It was all so intense I literally violently woke up moaning. I tried limping to the toilet to try and pee. I couldn't. And the last thing I remember is sitting on the toilet. Then I wake up to the sound of my mom screaming at me to wake up, and my head is pounding and I'm somehow in the bathtub. It turns out I blacked out from the intense pain and fainted, landing in the tub. Story 3. When I was 32, I was diagnosed with stage 3 advanced, aggressive cancer. I underwent 3 major 6-hour surgeries, battled a severe wound infection, and endured chemotherapy and radiation. At the time, I thought nothing could be more painful until my intestines stopped moving. I was hospitalized for 3 months. For 39 days, I wasn't allowed to eat or drink anything orally. Instead, I survived on a feeding line, a nasogastric tube, and 3 intravenous sites delivering various medications. To manage the pain and keep me sedated, I was given 3 milligrams of hydromorphone every 2 hours, injected directly into shoulder butterfly sites. For context, the maximum dosage is typically 2 to 4 milligrams every 4 to 6 hours. Even when I was unconscious, they continued administering the hydromorphone. It was relentless. Story 4. Intensity? A cluster headache that lasted several minutes. Technically, it's called a complex migraine. I ended up on the ground, writhing in pain so hard that I hurt myself on the ground. Length? Losing my 2 daughters in a car crash. It's been 6 years, and it's just as raw and painful as the day it happened. Story 5. Kidney stones. Forget that. I made sure at least a few dozen people will never dehydrate themselves again by crawling on the floor and vomiting down the stairs of my university, completely soaked in sweat. Never again. Drink, people. Drink. Story 6. In 1980, I was working as an industrial millwright at an aluminum smelter. I was told to remove the valve stem off a hot 600-degree 6-inch therminal line. The line was supposed to be empty. Unfortunately, it wasn't. On the last bolt, I tugged on the handle, and hot oil sprayed all over me. I suffered 22% second and third-degree burns. I always thought that was the worst pain until our beautiful daughter passed away from breast cancer 4 years ago. Story 7. My appendix nearly burst. I felt pain all the way across my body and was throwing up uncontrollably because of it. I was told by my surgeon that the reason I was feeling pain across and not locally to the side was because my appendix was 2.5 times larger than a normal one. To which my dilaudid-filled brain said out loud, "Hey!" causing the resident surgeons accompanying the attending to leave because they were laughing so hard. Story 8. Physical pain. I have polycystic ovary syndrome, and sometimes during my cycle, I will have such intense cramping that I literally ball up in the fetal position, crying, wishing I could reach in and pull out my uterus. Emotional pain. Loneliness at my lowest point. I've had 2 instances where I just needed someone to talk to because I felt I was spiraling with my mental health badly and had very few people I could reach out to. Those few were not there for me. This led to me completely crashing out for days, deleting all forms of social media, and withdrawing from everything and everyone while I worked on balancing myself again. I considered just completely checking out during those times, but I have kids, and the idea of them not having me anymore seemed worse, so I'm still here. Story 9. I had viral meningitis when I was 19, caused immense pressure in my skull, to the point that I couldn't move my eyes because the pain was so bad. The headache that came with it was immobilizing. I was placed in a quarantine room in the hospital. They gave me some painkillers through intravenous therapy, but it did nothing for the pain. However, once they took a spinal fluid sample, the pain disappeared in the most blissful way possible. Story 10. Mountain biking accident. I slipped going downhill and my crotch slammed onto the crossbar. So much blood running down my legs, and I'm in shock, so pain hadn't kicked in. I get rushed to the emergency room and discover my left labia majora has started swelling significantly. That's when the pain began. getting sharper with every passing minute. Finally, I get seen by the doctor who informs me I need stitches, but due to the swelling, they can't administer any anesthetic. The nurse held my hand and consoled my 19-year-old self that, compared to this pain, childbirth will be a breeze. So, yeah, stitches in my already painful lady bits without pain medication. I did get sent home with pain medication, thankfully, but unfortunately, the story didn't end there. I ended up getting surgery a few days later to relieve the massive swelling. Thank goodness, because I was in so much pain and could hardly move around. It all ended up okay. And now it's just a funny story to me. Story 11. Ovarian cyst bursting in me. Didn't even know I had a cyst prior. Burst in the middle of the night and I was keeled over in pain. Went to the hospital thinking my appendix burst, right side pain, and was brought in immediately as I was showing signs of shock. 13 hours and an ultrasound later, I was sent home as the cyst dissolved back into my body. Happened only once in June last summer. Scariest experience I have ever had. Story 12. I tore my anterior cruciate ligament and meniscus at the same time. The meniscus got stuck between the knee joint and blocked it. Every small movement hurt so much. I had surgery the following morning to remove it. The anterior cruciate ligament was reconstructed in a second surgery. Story 13. The worst pain I have ever experienced was stepping on a Lego barefoot in the middle of the night. Half asleep and fully unprepared. It felt like the universe decided that my soul needed to meet the sharpest edge of existence. A small piece of plastic, yet it delivered a pain so sharp I almost questioned life itself. Story 14. The feeling of broken bonds in my family. When I needed love and support the most, some of my closest family members were distant or absent. It left me feeling very alone. I often wished for connection and warmth, but instead, I felt empty and isolated. That lack of love hurt deeply, and it is a pain I carry with me. Story 15. Wisdom teeth removal when I was 16. They were still inside the gums and their roots were not fully formed, but at the same time, the teeth themselves were already turned at an angle of 45 degrees in relation to the rest of the jaw. If they started growing, the consequences would be terrible, but we were lucky to spot that on an X-ray. It was planned to install braces for other purposes, and the X-ray was done for that. My parents immediately took me to the dentist. The dentist had to do a mini surgery to cut the gums, pull out the teeth, and stitch everything back 4 times. It was done in 2 visits with a break so that my gums could heal and I could chew on that side. I ate a lot of painkillers that summer. Funny, though, the dentist said this situation with turned teeth happened because of genetics. I inherited big teeth and a small jaw, so there was basically no room for them and they started turning. Story 16. I've broken my tibia and fibula while kickboxing. He checked my kick, and it snapped. I needed 2 surgeries and a metal rod, and it required months of physical therapy. That being said, I had a dental abscess, and it was unbearable and made me cry. Story 17. Alcohol withdrawal. Went into the emergency room, and my blood alcohol content was 0.526. Woke up 2 weeks later after being intubated and in multiple organ failure. My whole family had flown up to say goodbye because they didn't think I would make it. Went into full intensive care unit delirium, hallucinating intensely. Threw myself out of bed because I decided I didn't want my breathing tube and nasogastric tube anymore. An NG tube is held in place with a magnet, which I completely broke and of course ended up in restraints. I was totally maxed out on medication, but nothing could calm me down. The existential dread of knowing that it wasn't going to get better the next minute or even day was indescribable. And after all that, I still drank again. Late-stage addiction is so purely bleak like nothing else I know. Story 18. The worst pain I have experienced would probably be the moment I got an unexpected paper cut. But I felt it was on a whole new level. It was one of those tiny, almost invisible cuts that somehow ends up feeling like the most intense, throbbing pain. You would think something so small could not cause such a big reaction, but in that moment, it was as if the universe was trying to prove a point about how even the smallest things can pack the worst punches. Story 19. My epidural failed suddenly when I was at 9.5 centimeters dilated and maxed out on Pitocin. I had to get a spinal block for my urgent cesarean section. The pain of trying to sit still while going through full-blown contractions every minute and a half was the absolute worst. Story 20. I had a pilonidal cyst, which doesn't seem that bad, but the pain was unlike anything I've experienced. I couldn't stand it one night, so I got very frustrated and cut it out myself. I survived with minimal damage. There was a lot of blood and pus, but the relief after it was out was incredibly amazing. Story 21. Firstly, my 16-year-old sister's suicide and having to tell my mother and 14-year-old brother. Next, smashing and amputating my finger at work and the 2 subsequent surgeries. Is this what you meant? Story 22. I was a paratrooper in the Army stationed at Fort Bragg. I broke my back during a parachute malfunction. I hit the ground lumbar area first, then cracked my head on the ground. A bright white light and ringing buzzing in my ears were so loud I couldn't even hear myself scream. Then I had to stop screaming and just groan because it turns out screaming doesn't feel good when one of your vertebrae is fractured and you have a hefty concussion. I had about 3 seconds before I made impact to contemplate mortality and life. And I kid you not, I just muttered, "Are you kidding me?" I made a full recovery after about 6 months and did another 20 jumps after my accident. I still have recurring night terrors relating to the incident, but it always makes me laugh a little because I still say, "Are you kidding me?" In the dream. I got out in 2017 after completing my contract. Story 23. I was trying to break up a fight between 2 people. I pulled the bigger guy off the smaller one. As I was twisting around to my left, my boot caught a nail head sticking out of the floorboard. My whole body turned around, but my left foot was still facing forward. I snapped my fibula completely. I looked down to see my left foot facing 180 degrees in the wrong direction. I would not ever recommend that pain to anyone. A close second was diverticulitis. Screw that as well. Story 24. Had a cyst in my armpit that was wrapped around a nerve. I couldn't move my arm for several weeks, hoping it would heal on its own, but it didn't. I went to the hospital and they put 5 shots of Novocaine in, but it barely touched the pain. The doctor opened the cyst and had to squeeze it to drain it. It was so painful that I faded in and out of consciousness on the table. She packed it full of gauze to make sure it healed on the inside. I had to remove it a couple of days later, but when I tried to do so, I again passed out. I had to have a friend come over and pull the gauze out for me. Absolutely the most painful thing I have ever experienced. Prior to this, though, I had a cesarean section, and as I was stapled closed after the baby was out, they hit a nerve. But I was completely numb, so all I felt was an odd jolt and my whole body began to tremble. I didn't have feeling there for a while, but the staple removal let me know what had happened. It's been 12 years now, and sometimes scar tissue wraps around the nerve. So about once a year, I have to lay down and move my scar in a certain way to tear the scar tissue off of the nerve. It's not as painful as it was initially, but I had no idea at the time that this would be an issue more than a decade later. Story 25. I took my mother to the emergency room for the last time on my birthday. They did the standard, "Do you know what today's date is?" She nailed the date and was close on other questions. This was late in the evening. I asked my mother if she knew what today's date was. She just repeated the date. Finally, I just asked if she remembered when my birthday was. The look of shock as she connected the dots still visits me. My birthday isn't the same anymore. Being asked to sign my mother's do not resuscitate order on her behalf. The soul-crushing realization that the end of her life was near. For the longest time, it felt as if I was tasked with signing her death warrant. Honestly, it still does deep down inside. Just acknowledging this makes my stomach hurt. Then, I spent the next 2 weeks giving her medication prescribed by home hospice every 30 minutes, 24/7. That still, to some extent, makes me feel like I was poisoning her to death. Then, while dealing with that, stepchildren decided my life just wasn't hard enough. The days leading up to my mom's passing were especially hard. The outbursts were wild. The only answer was more medication, which only fed into the loop of feeling like I was drugging her up to quiet her. I charted every dose. My primary care physician went over them with me and assured me I was not overdosing or poisoning her. But it still feels that way some days, that I can't shake. I'm so very sorry, Mom. Story 26. My lower lumbar joint right at the base of my spine exploded. It took 3 surgeries to clean it all up. When it first happened, I woke up and couldn't put my leg off the bed. The pain was excruciating and I would pass out. My abusive husband didn't take me to the hospital for 5 hours. It was agony. I kept going in and out of consciousness. When he carried me to the car, the pain was almost unbearable. I laid on the floor for hours at the emergency room. After a computerized tomography scan, I was immediately rushed into surgery. Took hours to clean up what they could. I never fully regained my lower right leg when it comes to nerve damage. I eventually had to get an artificial disc and a cage in my spine. I hope no one ever has that kind of pain. Changed me forever. Story 27. My appendix ruptured on a 3rd-grade field trip. The chaperones did not want to take me to the hospital without consulting my parents, and no one could get a hold of either of them. I was in pain for a good 2 to 3 hours.